Welcome back to the Horror Academic, and as promised, this time we're looking at another Stephen King movie that I love, another modern classic, The Dark Half by George Romero. So, I mentioned last time that Romero had been up for quite a few Stephen King projects through the years, and The Dark Half is the one that really kind of came to fruition. Now, it's not one of the most popular of Stephen King's adaptations to film, which is, a little sad to say, because I think this is a very effective film. This is a film that really tells the story well from the book, and I think it's because the two of them have such a strong bond as storytellers that they collaborate together well. The movie comes out in 1993, but the book was originally put out in 1989. So The Dark Half, and I have to admit, this was for many years my favorite Stephen King book. It's a little bit more visceral than some of the others, and it also kind of goes some strange places, and I kind of appreciated that. The Dark Half is the story of a writer who has to get rid of his pseudonym. He has to kind of beat to the punch a person who's trying to blackmail him by revealing to the world who really is the writer behind some of these kind of fairly grisly crime stories. And the author is Thad Beaumont, and his pseudonym is George Stark. And George Stark is kind of the polar opposite, kind of the metaphor of the evil twin of who Thad really is. So by publicly announcing in an article in People magazine with a photo shoot and the whole nine that, yes, I am, this guy, George Stark, who doesn't really exist, I am Thad Beaumont. It kind of opens up a can of worms, because he starts to realize that there's a manifestation of his alter ego that is killing the people responsible for the story coming out. That's how the story takes place in the book. It's also pretty personal to Stephen King in the fact that it is really a book about his experiences of kind of having to give up the Richard Bachman pseudonym. And Bachman's books were on the grisly side as well, and he has to kind of find a way to kind of exorcise the demon of Richard Bachman, and it comes out in the book The Dark Half. So it has that really kind of fictionalizing of this personal side that I appreciated, and it also, I think all of Stephen King's books tend to have a little bit of him in the protagonist. So I definitely I love this book for kind of its bizarre imagery at times. The kind of real twist to it all is that the reason why Thad has this kind of idea of having an alter ego is because as a kid he has these horrible headaches that are triggered by the sound of birds flying. And when the headaches become kind of too much, they do surgery and find out that he has, his body has remnants of an absorbed twin on his brain. So it's a really strange twist, and I think the movie does it justice well. Oh, I guess I should say, a lot of spoilers in this episode. There kind of always are, though. I think you guys have figured that out by now. And that's why I like talking about older movies. So, alright, so 89, the book comes out. It's a big triumph. #1 bestseller, like it clearly indicates on the book. I believe I read that it was in the top 3 bestsellers for the year it came out, next to like Tom Clancy. So it's a successful book. You knew it was going to become a movie. So after all of those failed attempts to work together again since Creepshow, George Romero and Stephen King finally are able to line everything up, and King helps to give the rights to Romero for this. Like we spoke in the last episode, he was supposed to have done Pet Sematary, but that didn't work out in the end, so The Dark Half becomes the way to go. Unlike Pet Sematary, though, King does not feel the need to write that screenplay himself. Be it his relationship with Romero, or Romero, his known quantity, shall we say, of Romero as a filmmaker and a writer, He leaves the adaptation up to Romero. And Romero says that he did his best to make sure he changed almost nothing from the book to the movie because he really wanted it to be Stephen's story. So you have this kind of already kind of camaraderie of relationship here that sets this up for a positive experience. Unfortunately, in working with Orion Pictures, it is not a positive experience that they would all like, and there's a lot of problems and issues, including the fact that towards the end of making the film, literally when shooting wraps, there's a span of time where Orion, I believe, goes chapter 11, and it takes a while to come up with the finishing funds to do to redo the ending of the film. So all of that to say is a really awesome crew of people. This is actually as for the Romero fans, let's put this in a little bit of perspective in his timeline. 93, meaning that we shot in like 91, I believe, because of that break. This is the end of his Pittsburgh period. This is kind of the last stop before everything changes and Romero decides to just give up on shooting in America and starts working in Canada. I guess, and part of that experience could very much be some of the problems that he had dealing with Orion Pictures in this and both this film and Monkey Shines. But it is a weird period for him because this is that short period of time where he is in a crossroads, right? This is kind of, the producer of the film mentions the point that this is supposed to be the film to launch Romero's career even bigger and more mainstream, but it doesn't happen because the film is not, it doesn't get that push that you get from a lot of the bigger studios, particularly since Orion was having financial issues at the time. But this film is supposed to also make up for all the things that went wrong in putting out the movie Monkey Shines. So there was a lot of effort to say, like, this was going to be kind of the shining moment. This would be the film to break George out of the independent filmmaker aspect of his career and open up the world, excuse me, and open up the world of big budget Hollywood. So it was much bigger than what a normal Romero production would be. So this definitely is not your typical Romero production then at this point. We're already in a field of working with a bigger budget, with a much larger kind of crew, with a much longer shooting schedule, and with using name actors. It's not a matter of finding people, it's a matter of picking the right person. And Monkey Shines is a little bit of that as well. But this is kind of much bigger. I mean, it's to the point where he has to go back and forth with Orion to decide who the cast should be. And both have to agree. The one big change in this entire adaptation, as far as I can remember, is that there's one casting decision that was altered that changes kind of the perspective of things. The character of Reggie, who is Thad's friend at the university he teaches at, is this older gentleman in the book. Romero talks about how he went back and forth with Orion over and over trying to figure out an older actor to use for the part, and they couldn't agree. They could not come up with someone that everyone was happy with. So Romero's like, well, Reggie's the type of name, though, that could go either way. So what if we try older female movie stars? And that's how the gender of that character gets swapped. The actress who plays the character of Reggie, though, is Julie Harris. Now, Julie Harris, Romero had been a big fan of hers in kind of the horror world. She's known for being in the original Haunting, but she had been in tons of films, including, he talked about being in love with her from the point when she was with James Dean in East of Eden. So she's kind of classic Hollywood in that sense, like 50s Hollywood. So that's the only real change. But it also is an example of kind of the clash he was having with Orion, where the producer and him wouldn't always totally agree on everything. It also was a matter of, Romero says that the experience of making The Dark Half for him was to learn to do things right on the first try. Because he was a person who, a lot of his movie making was very experimental at times, where, I shouldn't say experimental, I should say it was very kind of impromptu. And he would change things up, do things different, take lots of, kind of, the crew could kind of suggest a different angle or something, or, you know, an actor might suggest a different way to approach a scene. He was very open to interpretation, and he liked the kind of filmmaking as a group. He didn't really kind of prescribe to being the kind of like the overlord of the set as a director. He was far more communal about the experience of filmmaking. So coming into a picture like this, though, where he's given restraint, and it's very costly since the crew is so much bigger. So he has to kind of make sure that things are plotted out right the first time, shot right the first time, and he really doesn't have the wiggle room he's used to. Of course, kind of when we get to the discussion of how that movie ends, you'll find that that really didn't matter because they kept changing what it was, how the film would end. So for all the time he tried to save in the front half of making this picture, it still ended up kind of at a bit of you know, post-production hell. But all that to say, I think this is an awesome kind of interpretation of a really great book. So again, it's the team up here of Romero and King that makes me happy. As far as other people that worked on this film, you'll see there's quite a few of kind of the Romero kind of regulars who pop up. The Andersons do the production design and the costume design, the married couple who worked on quite a few of Romero's films. You'll also see that the editor of the film is Pascal Buba, who worked on pretty much all the stuff post Knight Riders, I feel. He was the editor on Creepshow, he's the editor on Day of the Dead, he's the editor on Monkey Shines, like I said, Knight Riders, Two Evil Eyes. So, and him and his brother are part of that kind of Romero family, who work on a lot of these pictures. There's also some people who kind of show up within the film that are familiar faces to Romero fans. To me, the kind of big one is Chris Romero, Christine Forrest, who shows up kind of as a nanny for the twins, the baby twins that Dad and his wife Liz have, and during the photo shoot scene. So Chris gets in there. The character who's trying to blackmail Thad is Clausen. He's played by Robert Joy. Now, Robert Joy would go on to be in Land of the Dead. So it was really cool to see him in this one, a little bit younger even. Other kind of in passing that I thought was really cool, there's a lot of surveillance by cops. So a bunch of cops show up in this film. And the one that caught my eye, cop number 2, is David Early, who was in Dawn of the Dead. And I believe he was in a bunch of Romero films. But to me, he will always be the kind of the talking head scene in the beginning of Dawn in the television studio. He's the one of the interviewers. So it was really cool to see him kind of pop up in there too. So what else about this? I also want to point out we have on the production team, the head of the special effects team on this is John Volek, who's worked on lots of great genre films through the years. The score is done by Chris Young, Christopher Young had also done Pet Sematary, which we just discussed, but he's also kind of really famous for the fact that he did the score for the original Hellraiser, so that's a cool fact. And I think where the Pet Sematary soundtrack sometimes felt the opposite of the tone and mood, like it was like almost intentionally sometimes felt more like the score of a drama than a horror film. I think the Dark Half, the score is a little bit more ethereal. There's lots of kind of alluding to this kind of eeriness of what's happening in the film that I think the score does very well, kind of chorally and orchestration. Let's talk a little bit about the main cast. So the main cast, and like I said, this is like Romero getting big names. The biggest name, of course, is the main character, Thad, and also George, is Timothy Hutton. Now, Timothy Hutton, to me, instantly I go to the fact that he was in Falcon and the Snowman in '85, which is like a kind of like a espionage kind of undercover kind of thing. As far as genre work, he's one of his first films, The Iceman in 1984, was a sci-fi film. Lots of thrillers, particularly after The Dark Half, or around the time of The Dark Half, including like The Temp and City of Industry. We have like Dead by Midnight, 97, a sci-fi film. One thing that's kind of cool to me was I noted that he was also in the Secret Windows in 2004, which is another Stephen King adaptation, which I thought was cool. After that, we have the Kovac Box in 2006, The Last Mimsy in 2007, Hashtag Horror in 2015. He was also in the first season of Hill House. But generally, I'd say Hutton's kind of known for a lot of dramas, and then he kind of makes that move to TV in the 2000s. The female lead of the film, who plays his wife Liz, Amy Madigan. Lots of dramas and thrillers in her entire repertoire. Her career, though, starts with The Day After in '83, with sci-fi film, Streets of Fire in '84, Nowhere to Hide in '87. Field of Dreams is kind of maybe like the film that really broke her into like the mainstream in '89, which, you know, might not think of as a genre film, but it's totally a fantasy. It's just based in baseball. Let's see, we have thought it really interesting that she was in a TV movie adaptation of Roe versus Wade in '89. I believe she plays one of the lawyers, which now I want to seek this out and find out more. So Murder on Pleasant Drive, I believe that's based on the same real life story that the movie The Stepfather is based on. So that was bizarre. She was in episodes of Fringe, Carnival, and Penny Dreadful. She was in The Hunt in 2020, and most recently Antlers in 2021. So she's a much larger, but that kind of just the genre work. Now the third lead in the film, I'm really going to have to break down this list because it is massive, because the sheriff in the film, Sheriff Allen, is played by Michael Rooker. Now, Rooker at this point, he's doing a lot of theater, but in film, he's totally known as Henry, from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and it was a hard sell to get Orion to think of him as a good guy. Apparently Romero originally wanted Michael Rooker to play the lead, and they were definitely not into that. So he read for that. He's told he didn't get the gig, so he goes off and signs up to do a play. Kind of halfway into him starting that play, they go back around and say, you know, what if you went for the sheriff's character? So it's kind of like a compromise, but because it's kind of a little late, Rooker has to kind of barter a deal where part of the cost of getting him to play the part is they have to pay for an understudy for him for the play for the weeks he'll miss filming the movie. So really the movie everybody in horror knows him for is Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer in 1986. I think a lot of us still think of him also as the dad in Mallrats, which is in 95. Let's see, we have... I'm just going to name off the bigger ones since there's so many on here. The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2000 with Jean-Claude Van Damme. He does Replicant in 2001. Slither in 2006. Love that movie. Repo, the genetic opera, comes out the same year. Let's see, we have Whisper in 2007. Jumper in 2008. Super in 2010. Atlantis Down in 2010, Hypothermia in 2010. See what I mean? His resume is packed. I forgot to say, in 98 he does Shadow Builder, Cell 213 in 2011, The Lost Episode in 2012, Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014. So okay, so everything changes right there, and all of a sudden he's in the Marvel universe. So that's crazy. That Michael Rooker is part of the MCU. Yeah, never would have thought that would have happened. So yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is 2014. The Driving Dead in 2014 as well. Belko Experiment 2016. Guardians Part 2 in 2017. Brightburn in 2019. Fantasy Island in 2020. Love and Monsters in 2020. The Suicide Squad in 2021. And Corrective Measures in 2022. So Rooker, though, is kind of like in his own way, a genre staple. So on top of that, he also was, of course, in a whole bunch of TV shows. I'm going to say Outer Limits, Tremors, Stargate, True Detective, The New Creep Show, and of course, he's in the first couple seasons of Walking Dead as Daryl's brother. So, yeah, Brooker by this time, he's huge. Pretty big deal for this cast. A lot of this film, I feel, works well with not just imagery, but also soundscapes and kind of messing with you using sound. Okay? So, we have, like I mentioned, as a kid, when Thad gets the headaches, he hears birds. And then when the day where they do the operation, they do a really great showing of this in the movie, of he's getting the operation done. The operation is, like, totally out there and weird. And then outside, sparrows are just swarming around the hospital, like intense amounts of sparrows. So there is this metaphor whenever things are starting to go a little sideways, that Thad hears birds, and it's sparrows. Sparrows start showing up on his windowsill when he's trying to kind of communicate with George. He goes into these trance states, and to communicate with George, what he does is he does this kind of trance writing, like this kind of dream writing, where he will, like he says at one point, his mother, he started out writing as a kid using pencils, and his mother saved up to buy him a typewriter, which he still, when he's writing as Thad, he uses the typewriter. But when he's writing as George, he has to use a pencil. George doesn't use a typewriter. So these types of things differentiate the differences between the two. But this kind of dream writing state becomes how George can talk to him directly. The murders are grisly in the way that they would be in the books that are written in George's kind of like context, like old school hitman kind of stuff. There's a joke at one point, and in passing, it's like something comes up about Clausen. He gives a really graphic depiction of how he would, if it were up to George, the way we deal with those who squeal. I'd cut his tongue out, shove his pecker in his mouth, and then when they find him, that's what happens to him. So, which was, I should mention that was a moment, this is very much at the time period when I started reading Fangoria, and I remember reading the article about the Dark Half before seeing it, and there's pictures in Fango of effects that didn't end up in the finished product, or what we see in the finished product is not as close up, or is in the dark and you can't quite tell, but in the Fango pictures, it's like, whoa, you could see everything. And so I remember watching the film like, wait, did I blink? Did I miss it? But yeah, so that just is a funny remembrance of me watching the film as a teenager. But what also ends up at the scene of the crime, because Clausen's the first found dead, is that in blood, written on his wall, is the sparrows are flying again. So now that, because of this kind of fake burial that they stage to get rid of George comes to life. And much later, Thad finds out his parents insisted on burying the parts of his unborn twin that are found in his brain. So it kind of makes sense as to where he comes from, in a sense. But there's all this playing with this imagery of killing off a fake character, a fictitious person. But, they put a tombstone there. The photographer, it's like a fake tombstone with George on it. George Stark, not a nice guy, I believe is what it says on the tombstone. And the photographer stages it with Thad and Liz kind of holding a pickaxe or, a shovel, and shaking hands over the grave. And it's this kind of concept of we're figuratively exorcising this demon by having a fake ceremony of killing it. And that becomes the kind of origin of how George manifests and comes to life. So while it isn't kind of overly stylized or overly in your face, it has the beats that feel right from both a George Romero storytelling perspective and a Stephen King storytelling perspective. And that's something that George was very kind of conscious of in making this film, is that he wanted it to feel like a Stephen King story and not too much like a George Romero story. But I think George still kind of comes through in what we see. So yeah, we have a series of graphic murders, and then eventually you get to start seeing George kill these people off, and he's just kind of this mean dude that you would have expect of you know, a killer for hire. Like I was saying before, one of the things I particularly enjoy about this is that this use of the kind of sensory metaphor, like whenever we hear things that are strange or off, we hear birds. Birds are kind of worked or kind of orchestrated around the score, so that it sets that eerie tone, and eventually Thad is hearing the sparrows again. And like I said, seeing the sparrows again. All of this culminates in this kind of wonderful metaphor once he finally, when he asks his friend Reggie to look up what are the significance of sparrows, and she tells him that in some cultures, sparrows are seen as the guides between the living world and the world of the dead. So this kind of bringing George back, bringing George in, and then letting him go again. And very much almost in a, I don't remember it being quite this similar in the novel, but in the movie it almost gives you this perspective of he's kind of a Freddy Krueger kind of demon, because he originates in the mind, and so you just have to stop giving him power for him to kind of dissolve. But they do a really great job of demonstrating the more George kind of gets Thad to the point where he has to deal with him. Too many people have died. It's down to the point where he knows his family is in danger. But it's this realization he can't hurt Thad because he would hurt himself. They're the same person, essentially. So as George gets weak, we see him kind of, his face goes through some really nasty stuff where, like, he's got kind of cuts that start to kind of evolve. He has these wounds that start to kind of pus coming out of him, and pock marks, and just kind of this nasty stuff going on where he has to kind of like bandage himself up at some point. And what we realize is that once him and Thad are in the same space, once Thad has to give in and say, okay, I'll help you write one last novel so that you can come back and be real, you know, slowly we see Thad start to get some of the wounds on his face while, you know, George's face starts to heal. So there's this really cool kind of back and forth in that. It's like a tug of war. Whoever is on top starts to heal, and whoever's losing is going to just kind of like have, you know, it's going to go through this process further. And it's really well done, to the point that the wounds are mirror image. It looks the same on Thad that it does on George. And this is something that Romero talks about, is Hutton at times was a hard person to work with because he was a very method actor, at least on this project. So if he was filming as Thad, everything was fine, it was normal, whatever. But once he starts filming as George Stark, he had to be George, so he had to be an asshole to everybody. He had to have a separate trailer that was run down, had this kind of total opposite lifestyle when he was playing the two characters. And while Hutton does an excellent job of kind of separating the two as to two separate characters that he's playing, it's very much playing off of the, like I said, kind of this evil twin theory. So, you know, when he's Thad, he's a little clumsy, he's a little awkward, he's a little uncomfortable talking, you know. He gets lost in the middle of sentences, kind of guys. You know, you see him lecturing his class, and he's kind of off in the clouds a little bit while he's talking, and kind of realizes they're there. Whereas when he's George, he's kind of like, you know, balls to the wall, kind of just mean, tough-ass guy. So he has that kind of air of confidence when he's that character. So you see, as things shift, those some of those traits start to shift as well. George gets a little clumsier when he's in really bad shape. But the way that is filmed, and that kind of back and forth, and how you definitely see Hutton's performances as both separate characters is excellent. A cool fact is how that one of the ways they did that, and this is very early kind of robotics camera, digital camera work kind of stuff, but whenever the character that's not being kind of faced, the body double is John Amplas, who plays Martin. And he was also in Day of the Dead, and he was also in Knight Riders. So he's a Romero regular as well. But Amplas is also an acting instructor for years and years and years, recently retired, and a casting person. So he knows to be there to be someone you can play off of. So he is a good fit for that. They're about the same height, too. But Volux talks about, kind of in post, they use kind of this harness around Amplas's head, so his head was always be in a certain position so that they could then superimpose Hutton's performances. They would flip. Kind of a little less technical version of how they shot Orphan Black, where when you're playing multiple characters, you have to have a way to use those performances against each other, as opposed to back in the day where you would just kind of like blank out one side of the camera and turn it over and shoot again, and then the two of them are there together. So we're getting there, but it's still 1990s tech. But they do a lot of things in this film that's using robotics and kind of early digital cameras. Keeping in mind special effects, the ending sequence, of course, like I said, went through many iterations. So there's a really, in the book, I believe the sparrows carry George away, because the house gets completely and utterly swarmed when they have their kind of confrontation. And there's, it didn't play well. Romero talks about the fact that this is the second film that he did with Orion, and it's the second time he had to deal with this kind of ridiculous experience of previews. And previews, unfortunately, they try and get audience reaction to a film based on just the story, but you're giving them the story before all the special effects are in place. And when you do something like that with any genre film like sci-fi and horror, they're not seeing the full kind of intent. So it's really a hard way to sell a movie to an audience. So yeah, you're going to get a takeaway is that the ending didn't seem great. Well, the ending didn't seem great because you saw a simplified mock-up of what will eventually be the special effects sequence. So, but what does come out of the whole preview situation is that they try all these different ways of filming this finale scene with George kind of being taken away. In the end, the Orion says, you know what, we changed our mind. Kind of just, the birds should just tear him apart, So what you get in the finished cut of the film is that it's a kind of a combination. The birds get more and more violent. They rip away his skin. They get down to his bones, and they take his skeleton away. There's really great extras on the Blu-ray, though, that show you the process they went through to that. They went through so many different ways of trying to make it look like thousands of birds, Of course, Romero says that he walked away hating the way the birds looked in the movie. He said they were even worse than in Hitchcock's The Birds, which is not a great movie for what fake birds should look like. But I think given the retrospect, kind of looking back at it now, and this is like the second time I've watched this Blu-ray in the past, I'd say past couple years, and I think they hold up pretty well considering this is 90s tech, So it's a combination of physical effects and digital effects in a time where digital effects were pretty new still. So I think they did pretty damn well. There's a lot of cool, they try to give George this kind of, like I said, this other kind of demeanor, and part of it is to have this kind of joking attitude during, kind of quips during the murders. And he's chasing down the reporter in a New York City apartment complex, and the lights are kind of out in the hallway, and the guy starts banging on the doors of the other apartments trying to get somebody to let him in because he can't get into his apartment because he drops the keys. And one person kind of pops their head out and is like, what's going on out here? Murder. You want some? So moments like that are just fun. Maybe this is also where that kind of Freddy Krueger-ness comes in again, is there's the scene where he kills his publisher, and his way is he uses a straight razor to do most of his killings. He cuts throats with it. That's his gimmick. That's his killer thing. So he kind of cuts the throat of the publisher, and then, as he's leaving, sorry man, it's a cutthroat business. It's like, but yeah, it has that kind of Freddy Krueger-ness of it, that it's kind of funny and like, it's all right. You can chuckle out of me. That's cool. There's the kind of duality. There's a lot of like dual imagery within the story. Like I said, you have this kind of evil twinness, but then you also have the actual twins. So Thad and Liz have twin babies that are maybe less than a year in the film at some point, and throughout the film. So they're little babies that are identical twins, essentially, and you have this kind of perpetuation of twins. There's the theory that a family that has twins is likely to have more twins. So it's almost saying, like, Thad and George are twins, so the babies are twins. It also leads to moments towards that end climax where, making it more dire, George takes the babies kind of with them to do the writing. So there's this good kind of mirror image moment of each of them holding one baby. So there's this kind of dual twinness of it. So I just appreciated that look. So I keep saying evil twin. Romero discusses the film as a Jekyll and Hyde story. How, Thad Beaumont, who writes nice novels that most people don't read, that's Thad. That's Dr. Jekyll. When he goes to his alter ego to write, he becomes George Stark. That's his Mr. Hyde. That's his, as Dad literally says in the story, George is my dark half. He's the dark half of us. There's a great opening moment where he's giving a lecture to his writing class, creative writing class, and he talks about how all of us are dual people. We're human beings because there's duality within all of us. We are all two people: the outward person that you have to be every day, and then the inward person. And writers and artists are the only people who get to play with that inside person and make that person come out. So, like I said, throughout there's all this duality imagery. So let's look at the editions of The Dark Half. So I did have this in VHS, but like I said, I don't have my VHS anymore. So here's the DVD edition. This is the MGM edition. It comes with, I love this, how back in the day, your special features included an original theatrical trailer and a collectible booklet, which there is no physical booklet. I don't have a booklet, so okay, shortchanged. Anyway, so yeah, so there's a fairly bare bones DVD. It's the only DVD edition that I ever knew of, so I'm not sure if there was a special edition before. This edition, of course, is great. This is the Scream Factory edition. We have the kind of press kit extras from when the film was actually made. So you have, let's see, original storyboards, TV spot, trailer, the vintage EPK. EPK being electronic press kit, which meant that when a film comes out, at this point, it would still be a VHS tape, went out to all the local news outlets to promote the film. An EPK press kit would essentially be a mixture of kind of behind-the-scenes footage, all edited together in a package with some interview clips with the cast and the filmmaker. And this has both that edited package, which is about 7 minutes long, I believe, and then the parts that make it up. So you have behind the scenes in making kind of towards the end of the film, you see like a lot of behind-the-scenes footage. You have, so the main cast and George Romero interviewed on the set while they're making the film, talking about what the movie is going to be. So that's what a press kit, digital, now it's a digital press kit. Electronic press kit just meant video. All of those parts are on here. There's deleted scenes, there's an audio commentary with George Romero, and then there's The Sparrows Are Flying Again, which is a great making of feature, and it's like a looking back now, so I love those. And this is a red shirt production. I like all of Mike's red shirts on Scream Factories are always worth the purchase. So he's sitting down with Romero, He's talking to like John Amplis is in there. The producer, who is Declan Baldwin, so he's in there. You have Christopher Young is in there for a little bit. Pascali Buba is in there. The editor. You know, a lot of these people. Michael Rooker. You know, you have a lot of kind of everyone kind of thinking back on it now. And also who was important in that process was Volux. So, I mean, like I said, it's a really great look back, great documentary. It really covers kind of everything from why it was an important film for George to make, how it fits kind of in his filmography and the world of Romero's film career. And, you know, it also talks about, you know, it's really interesting to hear. I know the book is about King dealing with, you know, the whole getting rid of your pseudonym, you know, the whole Bachman book thing. But for George, it was a different experience. It was the idea of, and this is something that George struggles with in a lot of his stories, you know, do I go and do something commercial, or do I do what I want at heart, you know, what I love? And that's very much like, yeah, the world, the audience loves George Stark's books, but that's not what you really want to make, you know, and that's in some ways a perfect metaphor for Romero's career at this point. He's making that decision. Does he step off this kind of level where he is, where he can make the movies he wants and that he loves to make, and then he does that full on go forward and do the more mainstream? So, you know, I want to be Thad, but I kind of have to be George, ironically. So yeah, I really loved hearing his perspective on that, which is really cool. Especially like he kind of is very aware of that being part of the story and how it relates to him. So that was, I thought, probably one of the high points. And like I said, Monkey Shines was not a great experience in many ways, but it was this kind of deal he had going with Orion to do adaptations of other people's work. And, you know, that's why it kind of also fits in as a great time for him to do, you know, a film with Stephen King. Amplis is the one who says it within the context of this documentary. I mean, this is the end of an era. This is the end of George in Pittsburgh. And Pascali's also very aware of this, how it's like this kind of homegrown crew. This is the last of it. And in some ways, you know, Pascali talks about how, you know, how proud he is of, you know, even Monkey Shines. He said those two films he thought really had kind of taken what they've been doing up to the next level. Rooker talks about how, while it was a difficult experience for him, because unlike the other actors, he was going back and forth to two different gigs. He had to still do that play. So he's doing two gigs at the same time. He's not getting the chance to kind of dive in almost as much as they are. But he's like, it was totally worth the experience because he got to make a movie with George Romero. And that was important to him, you know, like so much. I mean, even like the advertising, you know, is very much talking about, you know, this is the team up of the two kind of greats of the time, you know, King and Romero working together. King and Romero are at their best, Rolling Stone magazine. So it's like this, they're aware of this being kind of a selling point. Oh, I did want to mention that, in all of this kind of working with the birds, the sparrows, kind of this footage of the sparrows and how to make the sparrows swarm and all that kind of stuff, there's some really cool stuff they do. It's just like, it looks almost like sculptures of just sparrows in flight that are kind of like wire mesh that kind of moves around the camera to create even just shadows of it, and kind of almost like moving scrims and stuff like that with shadow imprints of birds in flight. But there's the discussion of, there is real footage of birds swarming, you know, and that's all shot by Tom Dubensky. Tom Dubensky was, I believe, assistant camera for Michael Gornick on much of Gornick's work with Romero. So Dubensky, again, is another name that's part of that whole kind of Romero family. So he shot kind of all of this different footage of swarming birds that we see within the film. It was also neat to find out that they were able to use, this was right after Bram Stoker's Dracula, so they were able to use some of the kind of like elements, you know, like physical effect elements that were used to create the swarming bats from Dracula. So that was kind of neat. Also, like how Rooker said the important thing about making this film was working with George. Christopher Young talks about how, you know, he was very nervous doing the score for this because he really wanted to impress and do a good job for George Romero, and they didn't really get to work together too much on it. He was, I believe they say he was using an orchestra in Prague, I kind of remember, but he was a little worried if it was going to be good enough. And of course, George loves the music that was supplied, so all in all, I mean, I love this film more the more I watch it, and I was pretty much sold on it in the 90s, so I still think this film holds up really well. I wish it had gotten more kind of notoriety and kind of the fame that other Stephen King films gets. You know, I think it's because it's from the 90s, and there were a lot of adaptations, I think, of King stuff coming out kind of back to back to back at that point, and I think it got a little lost in the shuffle. Like I said, that could have a lot to do with Orion having financial issues at the time, and not being able to properly promote the film as well. I remember renting the video when it came out, so I think it was known out there. But like I said, I was a Fango reader already, so I knew it was coming, and I was looking forward to it, and I had read the book. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to say that this, I love this kind of pairing of, again, two things I love. A great book by Stephen King that I know it's not kind of like the top of his canon, but much like how I'm saying, like, the Romero film kind of gets kind of lost in the shuffle of other Stephen King films, it also kind of gets lost in the shuffle of Romero's filmography. It's not a Living Dead film. Let's just be fair about it. It's not going to get as much kind of remembrance because of that. Unfortunately, Romero gets pigeonholed in a very strong way as the guy who makes Living Dead films. So, if there's no zombies, you know, how does that work? So, I think a lot of people kind of slept on this one, and for that reason. But I mean, I don't know if it's kind of like the most remembered Stephen King book either. So it's a time period where King was really kind of pumping stuff out. I mean, it wasn't as huge. I mean, I think maybe by this point we're already, like, his mini-series start to become bigger and bigger, you know, post-It. But yeah, I mean, all of this to say, if you have not read The Dark Half, read The Dark Half. I know I have ruined all of the points in it, but it's still a great story, and I still love it. And, you know, if you're a Romero fan, if you're a Stephen King fan, you really need to watch The Dark Half, and I highly recommend this Blu-ray edition. The Scream Factory editions are always the way to go for me. Yeah, I totally love this movie, and I definitely think it's not, maybe it might not be Romero's best, but it's a really great point in his career. And that in mind, I think I might follow this up with Monkey Shines, because I love that film too. In the end, another great movie, a George Romero classic. Thanks again for watching The Horror Academic, and I will see you next time.